Good morning, and welcome back to Reset. It's only our second week, and this is a collaboration between HarperCollins Publishers and Algebra, the Arts and Ideas Club to bring every week right to our doors, because frankly, that's the only conversations we are all having these days, that are both beyond this time that we are in to this time that we're in. Last week, we kicked off this conversation with two long-term commentators, Rajdeep Sardesai.
Are you on? I can't hear.
And they started necessarily, as we must, quite literally from what we call the bottom of the pyramid, those most affected by present catastrophe. But equal, I'm sorry, I think we lost. Just a quick recap, as I said, that we started Reset last week with two commentators, Rajdeep Sardesai and Karan Thapar, starting quite necessarily at the, as we call, the bottom of the pyramid, with the hundreds of millions of migrants and migrant labor most affected. But it is a privilege to have here in conversation Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal, who will talk and will be in conversation on not just the impact of industry, but the cascading effect of that on our long term, on our short term.
I cannot hear anyone. I can hear no sound.
We'll just look into that, Mr. Munjal. I think Mr. Munjal is saying he cannot hear any sound. But just as a quick introduction, a quick introduction, even though he needs none at all, Mr. Munjal is the chairman of Hero Enterprise. And apart from steering one of the absolutely largest conglomerates in this country, he has a really visionary outlook on multiple spaces, from industry itself to arts and culture and such like. In conversation with him this morning will be Rajesh Mahapatra. He has been an editor at large in Hindustan Times, a long-standing journalist and observer, also quite literally at one time, I think, with the Observer. But Rajesh, it's a pleasure to have you here doing this. Once again, both from HarperCollins and from Algebra, welcome to this conversation. And over to you, Rajesh.
Hi, good morning. How are you comfortable addressing Mr. Munjal or Sunil? Which way should I go?
I'm fine either way.
Okay, great.
Whatever you're comfortable with. Sunil is fine for me.
Congratulations on your book, The Making of Hero. The publishers sent me a copy 2 days ago. And I must say that 48 hours, you didn't actually need 48 hours to read the book. It was seamless, a very easy read and very engaging. So today, when we talk about COVID-19 and the world, life thereafter, I think, reading through the book, I thought we just go back and forth between what's happening now and what's weighing on our mind, and some of those things that the imageries that your book wrecks up. I think I could find there were so many linkages. So if today, we got barely half an hour, which I think we would need a lot more actually to talk about many things that are there. But nevertheless, let's make the most of the time that we have. So let me start off by saying the thing that I figured from the book, when you write about your father, you wanted to title today's talk as Business Not as Usual. And the thing that I picked up about your father is that business should never be as usual. So, okay, getting back to it, business is not as usual. Your company came up through a tumultuous period. The formal setting up of recrashioning or fractioning of Hero Group happened in 1956, but your father and your uncle started putting pieces together well before that, and they crossed the bridge, as one would say. What is it that, today we are in a phase of similar uncertainties, or probably worse than that? What are the learnings, what are the lessons from your own family's business, from your own book, from your own mentors that you would like to share with the world today?
So thank you, Rajesh. First, clearly, as you said, the way our organization grew from scratch, it always treated business as not being usual. There was always a little bit extra in every effort, in every aspect that was being put in. And it has been through many, many different periods of difficulty, of strife, of storm in public life, in public policy, in markets, in consumer behavior. It's been through all of those. And fortunately, it continued its steady and reasonably aggressive pace of growth all through that period, demonstrating that it must be doing something right at each of those times. And you're right, in the situation that we see ourselves placed in right now, it is important to lean back on some of the learnings we've had from unusual, difficult, and crisis-like periods, because this is as cataclysmic as it comes. There are people now comparing it with the World War, with the plague, with the Great Depression, because clearly in recent history, the generation that's around right now has not seen any period of this nature where every citizen in every town and city in the world is locked in at one place, with a small minority being allowed to move around to provide essential services. This is a time which calls for us to lean back on experiences through all kind of crises that any one of us would have seen. And if you think about it, this is a life-altering experience for many. I do believe it will change some people's behavior permanently. And some of it, human nature being what it is, we are very resilient. We will spring back to some of our old habits. You know, somebody was talking about never going to a theater again. I actually said, I'm willing to bet that you will be in a movie theater 1 year, if not in a year, certainly in 2 years, you will be out there. You will be attending sporting events. You will go to public places because this is not something which is going to change permanently. There will, however, be some things that will change permanently for us. And I think that's where it's important for us to lean back on previous experiences and see what we could learn, if anything, from those experiences. If you see what happened in the World War, for example, that two things happened. Companies making machines, electricals, etc., started making aircrafts and tanks and guns, etc. And these became some of the most innovative companies post the war itself. Companies like Siemens, Volkswagen, etc., when they came out of the war, they became leaders in engineering, design, manufacturing, technology. And the countries which got beaten up in some sense, if you look at Japan and Germany, they became the hotbeds of innovation. So any crisis is also an opportunity for us to learn, an opportunity for us to improve. And I think this one has come at a time when the world, in any case, was looking at massive change taking place, driven by things like technology, by genomics, by personalized healthcare. So let's focus on the 2 or 3 things which are direct impact. First, of course, is the healthcare. I think this will allow, in fact, force countries to change their budgets for how they view healthcare. In India, for example, only 7% of what we spend on health goes on preventive health. 80% goes on treatments and cure. And that's a lopsided balance. It has to change. So this is what, and I can equate them, if you like, with different events that we have seen ourselves in the lives of the business and our companies. But I would rather at this moment stick to a slightly more of a helicopter view of nations, because this is affecting the world. This is affecting the peoples across the world. And we will focus more on information and data gathering. So we had set up something called the IDSP in India in 2004. It's supposed to gather data on public health. And it's been struggling since it was set up. There was really never any big focus on this. I think now is the time for us to say, while we focus on treatment and prevention, let's also set up a strong foundation and a base for data gathering, for innovation, for research in all of these areas. Now, Indians have done this exceedingly well across the world. but India has not. If you look at the NHS, if you look at the top specialists in North America, if there were no Indians, both these systems would actually collapse. So how about bringing some of that great minds, that inquisitiveness into the Indian system as well? We had set up also a healthcare information system in 2007 in India, which was also struggling. And I can tell you that has come and in good stead for us right now. That is what the government is now using to gather data across the country on what's going on in cities, in regions, in states, even down to smaller subsets of cities and towns. And I think it's important that we learn from how we behaved and what worked when we changed our behavior in earlier crises. We have seen in our companies that when there was a problem, and I'm going back now a few decades of labor unrest, that the companies started automating more. So for example, in Hero Cycles, we had installed robots and automation in painting, in electroplating, in welding, in brazing, well over 30 years ago, when it was not fashionable. It was not really a done thing in companies, certainly not in bicycle kind of companies. So, and these learnings actually helped the companies as we went along. We said we will strike a balance between people and machines. And that fine line of the balance continues to change all the time. And we've kind of pushed that always, saying we will use machines wherever it is a health hazard for people, it is highly repetitive, or it needs a very high degree of accuracy. We will use machines. Rest of the time, we will encourage people. And there is, of course, a separate calculation on how you look at the economics of this. So I'm going to stop here. I don't know how long you want me to answer each time, but I can make the answers very short, or I can make them very long.
Yeah, well, we have 35 minutes. We would like to make, we've got another probably 15, 20 minutes to go. Is that right, Payal?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay.
We'll take as long as we need.
You talked about healthcare, and I'm happy that you said one of the biggest lessons is that healthcare is a public good, and we have forgotten that it should be a public good. It ought to be a public good, and that's one of the biggest takeaways. What are the similar takeaways that are there? Now one kind of hears at this point in time about Kerala model. So, would it be premature to say, we are living in time when now it is enter the Kerala model and exit the Gujarat model? Have you learned the right lessons?
So I'm not sure there is any one lesson that's good enough for us at this moment. This is still a learning period. By the way, it is very early days. We have not seen the worst of this disease, the breakout yet. The expectation of the climb in numbers is still somewhere between 3 to 8 weeks away for India. And the good thing that we did with this extreme lockdown, and by the way, the whole world acknowledges that India's lockdown has been the tightest across all nations. They've also, of course, said that India has provided the lowest economic support so far to the industry and the economy in general. But the model that we finally need to follow is not yet built. But again, the point you're making is actually very, very interesting, that each model that we have right now is teaching us something that we can learn from. What will work finally, what will be the ideal model, I think only time will tell. And I'm not even sure time will tell, because once this is over, we may not have the luxury to do a real comparison, because the demographics, the social structure, the behavior, the amount of travel, the age profile is different in each region, including in every state in India. While we like to think of ourselves as one big mass of humanity, but the reality is we are unique across different parts of India. And that in many ways, along with the comorbidities or others who are at risk, will eventually define how this plays out in different parts of the country. The one binding factor that we are finding is the massive numbers of migrant labor which is now spread across from 5 or 7 states to at least 15 other states. And that's an interesting phenomena for us to think about, because that's the second thing we do not think enough about, how the wheels of the economy are turning by a large section of our population, which is still considered and is in the informal sector. And that's as much as 90% of the workforce of this country, whether it's working in agriculture or in industry, both large and small. A large section of it continues to be on contracts, daily wages, informal, etc. It's only a small percentage which continues to get formal employment and at least what we call formal officially. So the model to follow at this moment, I think, is to strictly ensure that the advice that has been given on washing your hands repeatedly, and I'm saying this even though we hear about it hundreds of times, but I'm not sure a lot of people realize why we are telling them to do this. The coronavirus has a fat layer outside, which actually dissolves and dies with chemicals in soap and chemicals in alcohol-based sanitizers. So it is a very good idea for us to follow the kind of advice that we have been given, as also the advice of distancing, which is not yet clear whether it should be 1 meter or 3 meters, because there are different studies showing different numbers right now. So I think we have to watch the space while being careful not to overspend time on this. What I've been telling people is just listen to news only twice a day, morning and evening, and please avoid 95 to 99% of the WhatsApp that you get, because it's a lot of hogwash out there, a lot of misinformation going on, a lot of scaremongering going on. There are experts who can tell us what the real situation is, but to be fair, even they are groping around to get as real information as they can, because this is an ever-evolving situation. From having only 5 formulations under test from 4 countries 3 weeks ago, we have 96 trials going on with at least 54 formulations right now across the globe. So we are in the middle of this.
Because we have got a limited time, and I keep going back to the book because I think there are things there which are very relevant in the times that we are living in. So I want to pick on 2 things. So let me spread it this way. There are 3 areas that we talk about in the context of Corona, and then probably I'll have a wrap-up question and we'll probably end this conversation. So there is this humanitarian crisis aspect that we are dealing with. I would like you to spend a few minutes on that. The second is you talked about let me come to the second question later on. Let's first talk about the humanitarian crisis that we have at hand, the migrant workers crisis.
Sure.
The fact that suddenly we realize that there was this invisible army of laborers, and they remain invisible because that helped us sustain an exorbitantly high rate of return on the investments that we are making. This informality helped us. Is it time we looked at some of the very regressive aspects of this informality, which has today become a challenge for us, that we have long ignored it? They don't have social security. They don't have fallback positions. They don't have a social contract. And that's the reason why they all want today to stand up and say, we will go back. So, after years of having built cities and industrial landscapes, they do not have a sense of security, and they don't have the systemic support they ought to get in this time. Are there learnings and lessons that both the government and the businesses should be taking and really kind of incorporating in their future strategies?
So since you spoke about the book earlier, let me answer this question of yours from the book. What we did, and this is again going back about 3 or maybe almost 30 plus years ago, lots of workers in our companies come from Eastern UP and Bihar. They are migrants, as they are across many states in India and in many parts of the industry. So what we said to them was, and this is a discussion first we had amongst ourselves, saying, this is almost not fair. These people live a tougher life. They build the businesses that all of us operate. And they're living with 2 homes. They're feeding 2 homes. One where they live with us in places like Ludhiana and other industrial centers. And one is their family back home. So we said, we will encourage all of them. We said, bring your families here. We will encourage you to build homes here. So we actually gave them loans. And we said, we will educate your children in our schools. So our family foundations are very deeply involved in education, healthcare, etc. And the hospital will look after the health of your parents, your kids, and yourselves. So build a life here and live with your family. So the social structure becomes better, and their spend becomes more moderate, and they are closer to the place of work, and so their attention is on work. So it's actually a win-win for everybody. For us as a company, the productivity goes up. For us as employers, it's a much more humane and a humanitarian approach of dealing with labor and workers. And for them, the quality of life is dramatically improved. So those who cannot get this kind of support absolutely need a social net. So as a country, as a responsible nation, it is certainly time for us to think either of a basic income support or a social security support. Clearly, the country is moving in the direction of the number of schemes that we've launched in the last 12, 15 years, including rural employment, including providing healthcare schemes, etc. So we are certainly moving in that direction, but I think we are some distance away, and it certainly needs attention at this moment.
Okay. So the other two things that I wanted to pick up from your book, one is about, you talk about self-reliance in the values of Hero Group. Where does self-reliance fit in today's globalized world for India?
Right. So the self-reliance was done in a positive manner. It was not something which was seen as being negative. The self-reliance was that there are many components that we saw when the bicycle started, when the moped started, and when the motorcycle started, which were either not available in India or certainly not available in the quality and the scale that was required for high quality, world-class, world-scale businesses. So we actually encouraged many of our family and friends to set up units and entities and companies to make those components. So what we said was, we will help you design, we'll help you pick a component, pick the equipment you require for that, and also help you with the process. But we will not fund the company for you, and we will not run the company for you. And also, please remember that outside of this room, we may be friends, relatives, uncle, cousin, or whatever we are. Inside of this room and at business, we are business partners. So concept of arm's length pricing, of governance, of just-in-time inventory were established at that time, which are now considered the most modern contemporary governance and management practices. For India today, it is a unique opportunity because China, for various reasons, has become the bad boy in the world of commerce, trade, and business. And there are many global companies which have now launched what they call a 1+1 strategy, is to have a source in addition to China. So India needs to take advantage of that. And I don't mean only as indigenization, but to be a global player. And I'm now suggesting that we should not close our walls. We should become part of the global value chain. That's where we get full value of constant exchange of knowledge, ideas, and technologies. And the scale that we need to become world-class companies has to be world scale, not only India scale.
So in order to do that, the first and foremost thing that we probably have to now do is to kind of stabilize, restore our supply chains, which are disrupted in a big way, and will be disrupted even more as the lockdown is extended. And this is, normalcy is not going to return for many more months to come, if not beyond a year. And that again takes me to the other thing which you talk about in the book, just in time, the JIT philosophy. What are the learnings from that for restoring the supply chain disruptions that we have had to go through, or we will go through?
So absolutely. So just in time is one of the biggest assets of a company that's in the manufacturing space. It's also one of the biggest challenges in the manufacturing space. The just in time requires that the entire value chain has to be up to speed all the time. It's not just now and then, it's not just this week or the other week, but constantly able to provide components at the place, at the time required, at the price required, and at the quality required all the time. So you do not have to be sorting out goods and making sure that only the good quality is approved and goes in, the others goes back. So what it means is that for India as a nation, the manufacturing industry in India has to learn from what the automotive industry in India has done, as to build world-class systems, processes, technologies, and people practices. And all of these are required together. It's no one of them which can allow you to be a company which can work with just-in-time practices. Because just-in-time requires that every day components will come in, will get manufactured, processed, or assembled, and every day they will go out. So in our companies, we built no warehouse. When we did the restructuring of the group, we had 32 companies, and not one of the manufacturing companies had a warehouse or a godown, not one of them. And that only worked because all the hundreds of people in the supply chain, and by the way, the thousands in the dealers and distribution chain, all of them are working on the same model. If you're going to ship out goods every day, you cannot ship them into a crowded market. It has to be into a market which is constantly consuming and selling. And also, by the way, receiving the payments at the same time. So the whole thing initially started as a model because there was not a lot of money or resources. Eventually, it became a lean pipe model that we, in a sense, perfected and then followed company after company after company. I think as a country, to build ourselves on thin resources out of the enterprise innovation area. This is a good follow as a nation, and not just for manufacturing. There are many parts of this which can also be learned in services, which is the bulk. I can't hear.
Am I audible to you?
Yeah,
yes. Now, yes.
Somebody, don't mute me. I will mute myself when there are noise here. So somebody is muting me. Okay, good. Coming, two more things to talk.
Just an interruption, by the way. This is good for every sector, including things like healthcare, by the way.
Right. I'm sure.
High throughput, high efficiency is an essential component of JIT. So this is applicable across the board.
Yeah, I'm sure policymakers are listening as we speak, and I think a lot of leaning back can be done there on your experience as we kind of try to get onto a recovery trajectory. At least I found some of those things very fascinating, and that's why I brought it up. Mr. Munjal, let me ask you, the Hero Group story, is this a story, I mean, what is it more about? Is it about family, nation building, or is it about enterprise and personal? It's not both, but what is it that comes in the pecking order?
So I wrote, if you read the book right at the beginning, I wrote two things that, you know, my father and any of us asked for many story on the family and the company, and he would always refuse. And his logic was that it's not nice to talk about yourself. It seemed like showing off, and that's not the way we are. That's not the Indian way of looking at things, and that's not the kind of family we are. But he actually finally agreed that this would be a good lesson for others or learning for young people. So I decided to write this because I thought this is a story that needs to be told. And when I spoke with the publisher, he asked me, who's the audience you want to write this for? So I said, look, this should be an audience as wide as possible because it is not just a business story. It's not just a story of technology. It's not just a story of partnerships. It's not just a story of human endeavor. It's not just a family story. It's not just a family business story. It's not just a manufacturing story. It is not only India's story. It is actually all of them in some sense. It defines the development and evolution of India from when it got independent to when it started standing on its feet as a nation, which can be proud of its people, its capabilities, and its achievements. We have many weaknesses, but the book tries to capture the challenges that were faced and how many of them were addressed in as humane a manner as possible, looking at people as the primary and the most important resource of an organization, of a family and a society. And at the same time saying, you cannot compromise on performance, quality, and ethics and integrity. Because it is when you put all of these together that you create a successful enterprise. And it's equally relevant for any of us in a family, in a company, in a city, in a nation. So the story and the book is a series of stories. You can take from it what you like. And that's the way I wrote it. I did not specifically target or plan this only as a business book. In fact, the reason for writing it in such simple language, and you alluded to this when you started, was exactly this, that a school kid can read it, a housewife can read it, any professional can read it, a technologist can read it, a business consultant can get something from it. It's a story for many, and hopefully many will read it. The publisher tells me they've already had 2 reprints and they're going into a 3rd one now already in the book. So clearly some people must be reading it. And I hope they find this not just about lessons, but also that it's important to enjoy the journey, not just focus on a destination, because it's the everyday which makes up an interesting part of our lives. So if it's every day that we learn to enjoy and address little challenges, that overall we are able to collectively truly demonstrate something to ourselves and to get to where we would like to, and also to become better versions of ourselves.
Great. You said, you take what you like it. You like it, you like what you take, or you take what you like. What I took away, among many things that I took away, and the interesting facet that I came to know about was a man called Karamdeep, your friend of your uncle Om Prakash Chotala. I don't know whether many people would know.
By the way, not Om Prakash Chotala, it's Om Prakash Munjal.
Sorry, Om Prakash Munjal. Many people would know that the hero name was actually the brand name of a bicycle saddle manufacturer who was a Muslim. Yep. And he went to Pakistan and gave it to you. I don't think he charged a fee. Yep. It was that communal amity that this continent evokes. Right. And though that happened years after that bitter partition, I think there's a great learning out there that how social harmony and social peace can be so critical to the way we live and the way we build our nation. It has been great speaking to you, Mr. Munjal. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. Payal, you want to come in, or do we close it here?
You need to unmute your mic, Payal. Your mic is still on mute.
It's yes, I am here. Thank you so much, Rajesh. Mr. Munjal, I do have a couple of questions because some of our members have, in fact, just messaged. And I wanted to start actually by just asking, because of the conversation around the idea, specific to right now, the idea of a stimulus package. Yes. And there's an interesting formulation that somebody asked, which is to say, can you lock down and stimulate at the same point, right? Is that even a legitimate ask at this point? If the lockdown is necessary, how do you stimulate? Or is there something that you think can achieve both intents at the same time?
The answer is yes. In fact, it's all the more important that we provide a stimulus at this moment. The stimulus is not only to kickstart and get the economy moving, it's also to allow the economy to remain at level. Because at this moment, many companies have decided to keep their people on their rolls still. And the government has actually made a request in some states, an actual diktat, that you will not fire. So most companies did this happily in the first month. Now they're saying, I have zero revenue for this period. But by the way, my costs have not become zero. My office cost, my rental cost, my people cost, my Bijli cost, and others are still ongoing. So I'm not able to manage to stay afloat. And banks at this moment are not going to lend to a company which has no revenue. In most countries in the world, what the governments have done is they said, don't fire people. We will provide you the funding to support between 70 and 90% of the salary and wage bill.
That's right.
Some countries, they've done it only for the lower amount of wages. In some countries, for all employment. Netherlands have done it, Germany has done it, UK has done it. There are just so many countries. At this moment in India, we have provided support of 1,70,000 crores, which is also not 1,70,000 because part of this was already in the budget.
Sure.
It's just been moved forward, which makes it less than 1%. There are now countries heading closer to 20%. 8, 10, 12% are many now. And so our system needs that
I'm sorry to interrupt, but would you, are there specific 3 or 4 things you would say this are the first 4 priorities that we absolutely need to do?
Oh, absolutely. The first priority is exactly this, is that all the people who are displaced right now, we have to figure out a way, both a humane and a sensible way of managing them. Second is to keep enterprise afloat, to use Reserve Bank funds, 2 different places. One is the Forex reserves that we have, take out 20 to 30 billion, create a fund and use it as a backstop. Second is the Indian rupee funds that the Reserve Bank has, because this is a crisis. This is the time when you use things which you hoard and reserve. We are saying use the grain that we have in our warehouses to give to people free of cost. It's exactly the same with the reserve that we have of funding. The government itself has strained funds. We already know that. So we need to use all of these. We need to redirect. We need to forget, by the way, that we wrote a budget only a short while ago. We need to do a new budget with revised allocations of funds, with a large portion going toward prevention and healthcare, and support to keep the economy afloat. So either funding, if it's easier, to funding through banks, maybe providing to states funds at 0 cost or at 1%, providing through the banks 5 to 6 times debt, again at cost below 5%. Because don't forget, the companies have to stay afloat if they are to come out of this crisis and provide the economic kicker to people to get back their jobs and economic activity.
And my link necessarily question, it is crucial and has been crucial first to focus on the poor and deprived of the country, because there's a humanitarian crisis. There's quite literally starvation and homelessness, right? And so not to shift that attention away at all, but a lot of the middle class concern is of a different kind, which is to say, yes, we're not starving. Yes, we have basic supplies, we have basic security. However, for example, if you have home loans, you have rentals, you have fees, and exactly this, all of those expenses for which your nest egg is very minimal, right? It relies on your running income. So right now I'm speaking to everybody whose expenses rely on running income, who also find that stalled. They can maybe absorb this, as you said, like in many ways it mirrors the small enterprise, which is you can absorb it in the very short term, but is that also a different kind of almost invisible crisis, which is to say, are you disabling a whole segment of the population that does fine as long as there's
absolutely, and that's why I said that the center needs to tap into its resources for exactly this kind of situation.
What's the kind of figures you would propose? And when I say you did give a percentage point from an economy point of view, I'm just saying, say, would there be specific measures you can say this kind of financial support to this kind of segment?
So I don't have an exact breakup of this of each segment, but clearly, as I said, for the poor, the government already started by providing grain free of cost. We have to figure out a way to get to those people who still may not be accessible. There are many who are kind of the lost parts of population of India. So starting from there, that has to be our first and prime concern. Then moving up to every section of society, the elderly, the physically handicapped, the mentally challenged, because this is the invisible part of our population, by the way. And at the same time, recognizing the heroes. We need to do both things. In some sense, if you see, the very concept of patriotism, I think is different. We are fighting a war, but the war is not being fought with bullets. It's healthcare workers, it's nurses, it's ward boys, it's cleaning crews. It's somebody who delivers a package to your door. It's the sabzi wala. So these are today our big patriots. This service is a form of patriotism, and we all need to recognize this and provide both support and incentive in those areas. because these people are putting their lives at risk for all of us, as much as a soldier does on the front line. In some sense, it is very similar. So I would say each segment addressed with its concern has to be taken into account as we define this package. But if I look at the overall funding that the government may need to put out for this, I think we need to forget our fiscal deficit concerns for the moment, because even though we have put a budgetary constraint on ourselves, we need to allow that to slip for the next 2 years while we resolve this and bring the economy and people back on track. And in this time, we should not be shy of going up 5% or even higher than 5% of our GDP. I believe there is more coming down the pipeline. The Home Ministry has released one set of guidelines today for movement, etc. It's a 15-page guideline which has just come this morning. So we will see more coming, I believe. But I think some of this needs to be triggered earlier rather than later.
Sure. Thank you. I know the questions on this can probably never stop, but thank you for taking the time this morning and sharing a bit both of your expertise and your experience. Thank you, Rajesh, for hosting this conversation. And we hope to have you back here as the situation progresses to maybe look at whether some of your concerns have been met. Thank you to everybody for joining us. We'll see you back here next Wednesday.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you on behalf of Harper Collins and Algebra. Thank you.
Bye-bye.